The chipped mug warms his trembling hands, hiding his shame. I seem to have misplaced my wallet, the old man rasps, eyes pleading with the weary waitress. Chloe's heart aches. $2, I could use $2. But she already knows what she'll do. He doesn't know she's being watched, or that this single cup of coffee will cost him everything. This is the story of Chloe Miller, a waitress drowning in debt and despair, working endless shifts at a greasy spoon diner. It's the story of a forgotten old man with nothing but a threadbare coat and a story in his tired eyes. And it's the story of one cup of coffee, an act of kindness so small it should have been forgotten. But instead it set in motion a chain of events that would unravel a secret worth billions. Stay with us as we uncover how a 175 debt paid by a struggling waitress was actually the final question in the most important test of a lifetime. The Morning Dove Diner was less a place of culinary delight and more a museum of minor despairs. It smelled perpetually of stale coffee, sizzling bacon grease, and the faint sweet scent of bleach, fighting a losing battle against time. The red vinyl on the booth seats was cracked like old leather, showing glimpses of yellow foam stuffing beneath. For Chloe Miller, this place was both her prison and her sanctuary. At 26, her life was a tightrope walk over a canyon of debt, and the diner was the flimsy rope she clung to. Her dreams of being a graphic designer, of creating vibrant worlds on a screen, were gathering dust in a portfolio under her bed. Reality was a different kind of art. The art of balancing a tray of steaming plates, of smiling through exhaustion, and of calculating tips down to the last cent. Every penny mattered. Every single cent was a soldier in the war to keep her and her younger sister Lily afloat. Lily was the sun Chloe orbited. At 16, she should have been worried about prom dresses and final exams. Instead, her world had shrunk to the sterile white walls of a hospital room, a battlefield where her own body had turned against her. A rare autoimmune disorder was methodically shutting her down. The treatments were experimental, ruinously expensive, and not fully covered by their barely there insurance. So Chloe worked. She took double shifts, picked up holiday hours, and wore a smile as brittle as spun sugar, while her heart felt like a lead weight in her chest. This Tuesday morning was like any other. The morning rush had been a flurry of impatient construction workers and quiet office drones. Now, in the mid-morning lull, the diner was sparsely populated. Chloe leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, her feet throbbing in her worn-out sneakers, rereading a text from the hospital's billing department. Payment overdue. Please remit $2,347,000 to avoid service interruption. Service interruption? They made it sound like a cable subscription. Daydreaming again. Miller. Chloe jumped, stuffing her phone back into her apron pocket. Brenda, her senior by 20 years and 100 layers of cynicism, was wiping down the counter with a cloth that had seen better decades. Just checking the time, Chloe lied. Right. Time to face the music. Brenda grunted, nodding towards the door. We've got a live one. An old man stood hesitantly just inside the doorway, as if unsure whether he was welcome. He was painfully thin, his frame lost inside a tweed overcoat that was frayed at the cuffs and collar. His gray hair was unkempt, and his face was a roadmap of wrinkles. But it was his eyes that caught Chloe's attention. They were a pale, washed-out blue, cloudy with age, and they held a deep, profound weariness that seemed to suck the light out of the room. He clutched a worn, flat cap in his trembling hands. He shuffled toward the counter and slid onto a stool, his movements slow and deliberate. Chloe grabbed a menu and a glass of water, placing them in front of him with her practiced, friendly smile. Welcome to the Morning Dove. Can I get you started with something to drink? Coffee's fresh. The old man blinked as if her voice had pulled him from a great distance. Coffee. He rasped, his voice thin and dry like rustling leaves. Just coffee. Black. Chloe poured a cup from the pot, the dark liquid steaming in the thick ceramic mug. He wrapped his gnarled, shaky hands around it, letting the warmth seep into his bones. He didn't look at the menu. He just stared into the black depths of the coffee, lost in a world of his own. Chloe went about her work, refilling salt shakers and wiping down tables, but she kept an eye on him. He sat there for nearly an hour, taking slow, infrequent sips. He never said a word. Other customers came and went. a family with loud children, a couple arguing in hushed tones, a businessman tapping furiously on a laptop. Through it all, the old man remained a silent, still statue at the counter. Finally, he drained the last of his coffee. He fumbled in the pockets of his coat, a look of mild panic growing on his face. He checked his trouser pockets, his movements becoming more frantic. He patted his coat again, his brow furrowed in distress. "Is everything all right, sir?" Chloe asked gently. He looked up at her, his pale eyes wide with embarrassment. I seem to have misplaced my wallet. I'm so sorry, I thought I had a few dollars." His voice cracked. I can come back. I live nearby, I promise." Brenda, overhearing from the grill, scoffed loud enough for a dog to hear. "Yeah, right. Live nearby. That's what they all say." Chloe shot Brenda a silencing glare before turning back to the man. She saw the deep flush of shame on his wrinkled cheeks, the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. In his humiliation, she saw a reflection of her own constant gnawing fear, the fear of not having enough, of being at the mercy of others. Her own problems felt immense, a tidal wave about to crash over her. But in that moment, this man's small, acute shame felt more immediate. "Don't you worry about it," she said, her voice soft. She reached for the check she'd placed by his elbow. "It was for $175. It's on the house today." The man looked stunned. "Oh, no. I couldn't possibly." "Please," Chloe insisted, giving him a genuine smile. It was the first one that hadn't felt like a mask all day. "It's just a cup of coffee. Consider it a gift. Everyone needs one of those now and then." She crumpled up the check and tossed it into the bin behind the counter. She turned to the cash register, pulled her own small purse from under the counter, and rang up the sale, paying for it, with 2 crumpled $1 bills from her own tip money. The old man watched her, his expression unreadable. The panic in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, intense scrutiny. He just stared at her for a long moment. "Thank you," he finally whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Thank you, my dear. You are very kind." He slid off the stool, gave a small, formal nod, and walked slowly out of the diner, the little bell above the door tinkling softly in his wake. "You're a sucker, Chloe," Brenda said, shaking her head as she scraped grease off the griddle. "A complete and utter sucker. That's $2 you could have used for, your sister's service interruption." Chloe flinched at the jab, but didn't rise to the bait. She just looked at the empty stool where the old man had sat. $2. It was nothing, and it was everything. She didn't know why, but as she watched the rain begin to streak down the diner window, she felt a strange sense of peace. It was a fleeting, foolish feeling, but for a moment it was enough. She had no idea that her small act of kindness wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A test had just been administered, and she had given her answer. The following week was a slow-motion catastrophe. The hospital's billing department was no longer sending texts. They were calling their voices a practiced blend of synthetic sympathy and unyielding demand. The landlord had slipped a notice under her door, its fluorescent pink paper, a glaring beacon of her failure. It wasn't an eviction notice yet, but a final warnings, 2 words that felt like a punch to the gut. The cracks in Chloe's carefully constructed dam of composure were widening, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. She took on more shifts until exhaustion became her new normal. Her world was a blur of taking orders, refilling coffees, and the endless clawing smell of maple syrup. The smiles she gave customers felt heavier, the friendly chatter more forced. Her mind was a constant, frantic calculation of bills owed versus tips earned, a race she was perpetually losing. It was during a particularly grueling Thursday lunch rush that the bell above the door tinkled, and he was back. The same old man in the same threadbare coat, looking just as lost and weary as before. He shuffled to the same stool at the counter, his cloudy blue eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps something else passed through them. "Coffee, please," he rasped, his voice as frail as ever. "Black." Chloe's heart did a strange little flutter. She wasn't sure if it was annoyance or relief. Brenda from her perch by the kitchen passed through, rolled her eyes so hard it was a miracle they didn't fall out. "Your boyfriend's back," she stage whispered. "Hope you're ready to open your wallet again." Chloe ignored her and poured the coffee, placing it in front of him with a small, tired smile. Good to see you again. The man nodded, his gaze fixed on her. You are here again. It's my job, she said with a light shrug. He sat for a long time, just as before, nursing the single cup of coffee. The lunch rush swirled around them, a chaotic symphony of clattering plates and shouted orders. Chloe was a whirlwind of motion, but she remained acutely aware of the still point at the counter. He watched her every move. He watched her handle a belligerent customer who claimed his bacon was too crispy, patiently taking it back to the kitchen without argument. He watched her kneel to help a mother pick up a box of crayons her toddler had thrown across the floor. He watched her share a quiet, kind word with a regular and elderly woman who always ate alone. When the rush finally subsided, he was still there. He called her over his voice, barely a whisper. Miss, he said, looking down at the table, I seem to have done a clumsy thing. He gestured to the floor. The half-full sugar dispenser lay on its side. A small mountain of white crystals spread across the grimy linoleum. Oh my heavens, I am so sorry, he mumbled, his face coloring with shame. My hands. They don't always listen to me anymore. Brenda let out an audible sigh from the other end of the counter. For crying out loud, she muttered. Chloe's back HD. Her feet were screaming. The last thing she wanted to do was get on her hands and knees to clean up a sticky, sugary mess. A hot flash of irritation shot through her. Why did this have to happen now? Why him? But then she looked at his face, the genuine distress in his eyes, the tremor in his hands as he tried uselessly to scoop up the sugar. It extinguished her anger in an instant. This wasn't malice. It was mortality. It was the quiet, clumsy indignity of a body betraying its owner. Please don't you worry about it for a second, she said, her voice softening. It happens to the best of us. It's just sugar. She grabbed a dustpan and brush from the back. As she knelt on the floor, sweeping up the granules, she could feel his intense gaze on her. It was unnerving. It wasn't just the look of an embarrassed old man. It was analytical, penetrating, as if he were looking right through her, weighing and measuring something she couldn't see. When she stood up, brushing the dust from her apron, he cleared his throat. I must pay for that and for my coffee. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled handful of change. He carefully counted it out onto the counter. It amounted to 97 cents. It is all I have today, he said, his gaze dropping to the coins. I can come back with the rest, I promise. The cost of the coffee was $1.75. The cost of a refilled sugar dispenser was negligible in terms of money, but significant in terms of diner politics. Brenda was staring at her a smug. I told you so. Look on her face. This was it. This was the moment to cut him off, to tell him not to come back unless he could pay to protect what little she had. It was the sensible thing to do. Chloe looked at the pathetic pile of coins. She looked at the man's worn-out shoes. She thought of the pink notice on her apartment door and the robotic voice from the hospital's billing department. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to say no. Instead, she pushed the coins back towards him. You keep that, she said quietly. You might need it for a bus or something. She took out her own wallet and paid for his coffee again, her movements quick and decisive. This one's on me, too. Don't worry about the sugar. The man didn't thank her this time. He just stared at her, his cloudy eyes seeming to clear for a moment, revealing a startling, sharp intelligence. He slowly scooped the coins back into his pocket, his gaze never leaving her face. Why? He asked, his voice suddenly stronger, less raspy. Chloe was taken back by the directness of the question. Why? What? Why do you do that? He pressed. This is the second time you work for tips. You cannot afford to give away your earnings. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, and it hit a little too close to home. My mother always said that you don't measure your wealth by what you have, but by what you can give away. Chloe found herself saying the words tumbling out before she could stop them. It was something her mom used to say before she got sick and passed away, leaving Chloe to care for Lily. And sometimes a cup of coffee is more than just a cup of coffee. The man's expression softened. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if she had just confirmed a long-held hypothesis. He stood up, placed his flat cap on his head, and walked out without another word. As the door tinkled shut, Brenda strode over, her arms crossed. I don't believe you. You are certifiably insane, Chloe Miller. He's playing you like a fiddle. A broke, grimy old fiddle. Mark my words, he'll be back, and next time he'll have a sob story about needing money for his sick parakeet. Chloe didn't respond. She just wiped down the sticky spot on the counter where the sugar had been. She didn't feel insane. She felt strangely calm. She had acted against all logic, against all self-interest. It was reckless. It was stupid. And for some reason, it felt like the only right thing to do in a world that felt so wrong. But as she headed home that night to her pink slipper-adorned door, a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Kindness didn't pay the rent, and time was running out. The eviction notice arrived a week later. The fluorescent pink of the warning was gone, replaced by the stark, official white of a legal document. The words "Notice to Vacate" seemed to leap off the page in bold black letters. She had 30 days to come up with 3 months of back rent or find a new place to live. The thought of packing up her life, of finding a new home she couldn't afford, of disrupting the fragile stability she was trying to maintain for Lily was paralyzing. That same afternoon, the hospital called again. Lily had developed a complication, a minor infection that her compromised immune system was struggling to fight. The doctor was calm, reassuring, but Chloe heard the unspoken words between the lines. "This is serious. This is expensive." He mentioned a new course of antibiotics, ones that were, of course, not fully covered by insurance. The number he quoted made the room spin. Chloe hung up the phone and sank onto her lumpy sofa, the eviction notice crinkling in her hand. For the first time, she felt the fight drain out of her. She was adrift in a vast, indifferent ocean, and she had forgotten how to swim. Despair, cold and heavy, settled over her like a shroud. She dragged herself to work the next day, her face pale, her movements robotic. Every customer's smile, every polite request, felt like a physical blow. She was a ghost in an apron haunting the aisles of the Morning Dove diner. And then he came in. The old man, it was late afternoon, the diner nearly empty. He didn't take his usual seat at the counter. Instead, he shuffled to a small booth in the corner, sinking into the cracked vinyl with a weary sigh. Chloe approached his table, her order pad in her hand, her mind a million miles away. She barely registered his presence beyond a familiar shape. "The usual?" she asked, her voice flat. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw a raw, genuine anguish in his eyes that mirrored her own. His face was ashen, his hands trembling more violently than usual. "My dear," he began, his voice cracking with emotion. I am in terrible trouble." Chloe braced herself. "Here it comes," she thought, Brenda's cynical voice echoing in her head. "The sick parakeet. It's my granddaughter," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, desperate whisper. "It's her birthday today. She's 7. I was supposed to meet my son to give her a present, but I lost the money. I had $50 saved up for weeks. It must have fallen out of my pocket on the bus." He looked down at his empty, trembling hands. "I can't show up empty-handed. Not on her birthday. It would break her little heart. And my son, he would be so disappointed in me." He looked up at her, his pale blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I don't know who else to ask. I know I have no right. But could you possibly lend me $20? Just 20. I'll pay you back. I get my pension check next week. I swear on my life I will come back and pay you." Chloe stood frozen, the pen hovering over her notepad. $20. To her at that moment, it might as well have been 20,000. It was the gas money she needed to get to the hospital for the next week. It was the groceries she was planning to buy on the way home. It was a tiny fraction of what she owed, but it was tangible. It was hers. Everything in her screamed, though. The rational part of her brain, the part that was staring at the eviction notice, taped to her refrigerator, told her to walk away. He was a stranger, a mooch, a con artist preying on her good nature. Brenda would laugh her out of the diner. But his story, a granddaughter's birthday, the fear of disappointing his son, it was so specific, so painfully human. She looked at his desperate, tear-filled eyes, and she didn't see a con man. She saw a grandfather. She saw the same desperation she felt every time she looked at Lily. the same gut-wrenching fear of letting down the person you love most in the world. Her resolve crumbled. "Wait here," she whispered. She walked to the back near the employee lockers. Her hands shook as she pulled out her wallet. Inside was a $50 bill and a few singles. She had cashed a check from a catering gig she had done on her day off. It was supposed to be a down payment on the rent, a pathetic offering to the landlord to beg for more time. She stared at the 50. It was her lifeline. With a deep, shuddering breath, she pulled out two $20 bills and a 10. She folded the two 20s together and tucked them into her apron. The 10 she put back. A voice screamed at her, calling her a fool, a martyr, a complete and utter idiot. She ignored it. She walked back to the booth and slid the folded bills across the table to him. "Here," she said, her voice barely audible. "This is 40. Get her something nice and get yourself a hot meal." The old man stared at the money, then up at her, his mouth agape. He looked at the $40 as if it were a winning lottery ticket. He seemed genuinely, profoundly shocked. I only asked for 20, he stammered. "I know," Chloe said, a strange, almost reckless calm settling over her. But a 7-year-old deserves something special for her birthday. She was at rock bottom. She had nothing left to lose, it felt. And in that moment of complete financial ruin, giving away that money felt less like a loss and more like an act of defiance. It was a rebellion against the crushing, merciless logic of dollars and cents that had ruled her life for so long. He reached across the table, and for the first time he touched her. His hand was surprisingly warm, his skin paper thin. He gently clasped her wrist. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice filled with a raw, searching intensity. "You look as though you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." A single tear escaped Chloe's eye and traced a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "I'm sure," she said, her voice thick. "Just make your granddaughter happy." He held her gaze for a long moment, his own eyes shining. He slowly released her wrist, picked up the money, and tucked it carefully into an inside pocket of his coat. He stood up, his movements more steady than she'd ever seen them. "I will not forget this, Chloe." "Miller," he said, his voice clear and firm. Chloe froze. He had used her full name. She always wore a name tag, of course, but he said it with such purpose, such finality. Before she could ask, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving her standing by the booth, the imprint of his warm hand still on her wrist, and a $40 hole where her hope had been. She felt a profound emptiness, a certainty that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had given away her last lifeline on a sob story. Her rebellion felt hollow, now replaced by the cold, hard reality of her situation. She had nothing left. The test was over, and she was sure she had failed. For 2 days after the $40 transaction, the old man did not appear. Chloe found herself scanning the door. Every time the bell tinkled, a knot of anxiety and regret tightening in her stomach. Brenda was merciless. "So has Grandpa Warbucks returned with your fortune yet?" she'd ask with a sneer. "Or did he and his granddaughter take a trip to Bermuda on your grocery money?" Chloe had no defense. The act that had felt so defiant in the moment now just felt stupid. The $40 she had given away had become a symbol of her own foolishness. She had to borrow money from a fellow waitress just to put gas in her car to visit Lily, a humiliation that stung more than any of Brenda's taunts. It was on the third day, a Saturday, that a new presence made itself felt in the diner. He was the polar opposite of the shabby old man. He arrived just before the lunch rush, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He was perhaps in his late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and an air of quiet authority that was utterly out of place amongst the sticky tabletops and chipped coffee mugs. He chose a booth in the far corner, the same one the old man had occupied on his last visit. He requested a black coffee and a menu, but Chloe noticed he never once opened it. Instead, he opened a leather-bound folio and appeared to be reading, but his eyes were rarely on the page. They were scanning the room, observing the staff, taking in the rhythm of the diner. More than once, Chloe felt his gaze linger on her. It wasn't a leerous stare. It was something else. It was cool, detached, and evaluative. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen. Chloe felt a prickle of unease, Was he a health inspector? A corporate scout for a chain looking to buy the place? Or worse, was he from the landlord's agency? A man sent to see if she was still employed before they finalized the eviction? Her mind raced through a dozen paranoid scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. The man stayed for hours. He nursed that single cup of coffee occasionally, asking for a refill, which he paid for with a crisp $20 bill, telling Chloe to keep the change with a polite but impersonal nod. The tip was more than she sometimes made in an hour, but it felt strangely sterile, a transaction devoid of any real connection. Brenda was intrigued. "Now that's the kind of customer you should be focusing on," she whispered to Chloe. "Looks like old money, probably a lawyer or a banker. Go flash him a smile. Maybe he'll leave you his inheritance." But Chloe couldn't bring herself to do it. The man's presence was too unnerving. It felt like he was waiting for something. The lunch rush came and went. The afternoon lull settled in. The man in the corner remained a silent, watchful sentinel. Chloe tried to go about her work, but his presence was a constant, low-level hum of anxiety in the back of her mind. She found herself being overly meticulous, wiping down counters that were already clean, double-checking orders, forcing her smile to be brighter than usual, all under his quiet, penetrating gaze. Around 3 the bell on the door tinkled. Chloe's head snapped up, her heart lurching with a familiar, foolish hope. But it wasn't the old man. It was a young mother with 2 rambunctious children who immediately began clamoring for milkshakes and fries. Chloe took their order, her shoulders slumping with a disappointment she wouldn't admit to anyone. As she turned to put the order in, she glanced at the man in the corner. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. But as her eyes met his, he gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It felt like an acknowledgement, a signal that some silent observation had been concluded. A few minutes later, as Chloe was at the milkshake machine blending chocolate and vanilla, the man stood up. He left another generous tip on the table, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked towards the front of the diner. Chloe expected him to leave, but instead he paused by the cash register, waiting. When she finished the milkshakes and brought them to the family's table, she made her way to the register to cash out another customer. The man in the suit waited patiently. When it was his turn, he didn't present a check. He simply looked at her, his sharp eyes examining her face. "Are you Chloe Miller?" he asked. His voice was deep and resonant, a boardroom voice that had no place in a greasy spoon. Chloe's blood ran cold. This was it. The landlord, the debt collector. "Yes," she managed to say, her own voice sounding thin and weak. "Can I help you?" He did not smile. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a slim, elegant business card case. He slid out a card with his thumb and placed it on the counter between them. The card was made of thick, creamy stock, the lettering embossed in a deep navy blue. James Harrison, Senior Counsel, Sterling Industries. Beneath the name was an address in the city's most prestigious downtown financial district and a phone number. Chloe stared at the card, utterly bewildered. Sterling Industries was a titan, a multinational conglomerate with fingers in everything from tech and pharmaceuticals to global logistics. Its founder and CEO, Arthur Sterling, was a reclusive, semi-legendary figure, one of the wealthiest men in the world. What on earth would a senior lawyer from a company like that want with a waitress at the Morning Dove diner? "M. Sterling would like to request a meeting with you," Harrison said, his tone flat and professional. "Tomorrow morning, 10 at the address on the card." Chloe's mind was a maelstrom of confusion. "Mr. Sterling? Arthur Sterling? Why? I don't understand why. What is this about?" Harrison's expression did not change. "All of your questions will be answered at the meeting. We are prepared to compensate you for your time away from work." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And I would advise you not to be late. Mr. Sterling does not appreciate tardiness." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving the business card sitting on the counter like a strange, impossible artifact from another world. Chloe picked it up, her fingers trembling. Sterling Industries. Arthur Sterling. The name echoed in her head, but it made no sense. She had no connection to that world of unimaginable wealth and power. From across the diner, Brenda called out, "What did M. Fancy Pants want? Did he offer you a job polishing his silverware?" Chloe couldn't answer. She just stared at the card, a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly insane idea beginning to form in the deepest recesses of her mind. An idea so ludicrous she barely dared to think it. The old man, his cloudy, pale blue eyes, his strange, persistent tests, his final words. "I will not forget this, Chloe Miller." Could it be no? It was impossible. It was the stuff of fairy tales and cheap novels. And yet the business card in her hand felt undeniably real. Tomorrow morning, 10, worrying. One way or another, she was about to find out. The next morning, Chloe stood on a rain-slicked marble plaza, staring up at a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the gray overcast sky. The words Sterling Tower were carved in massive, severe letters above a set of revolving glass doors. This was the address from the card. It felt less like a building and more like a monument to a god she'd never heard of. She had spent a sleepless night tossing and turning her mind a frantic battlefield of speculation. She called the diner and begged for the morning off, offering to work a double shift the next day to make up for it. Her manager, swayed by the desperation in her voice, had reluctantly agreed. Now standing at the foot of this glass and steel behemoth, she felt a crippling wave of imposter syndrome. She was wearing her best and only interview outfit, a simple black skirt, and a slightly faded blue blouse she'd ironed 3 times. She felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. Every person who swept past her through the revolving doors exuded an aura of wealth and purpose. Their expensive suits and leather briefcases, a stark contrast to her worn handbag. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she pushed her way through the doors into a lobby so vast and silent, it felt like a cathedral. The floors were polished black granite. The walls were adorned with enormous abstract modern art, and a single severe-looking receptionist sat behind a desk that was longer than Chloe's entire kitchen. Her heart pounding, she approached the desk. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have a 10-hour appointment with Mr. Sterling." Saying the name out loud felt absurd. The receptionist, a woman with unnervingly perfect hair, looked up from her computer, her expression a cool mask of professional indifference. "Your name?" "Chloe Miller." The receptionist tapped a few keys. Her eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Ah, yes, Miss Miller. Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please take the private elevator on your right. It has been keyed for the penthouse floor. A private elevator, the penthouse floor." The sense of surrealism intensified. Chloe walked on trembling legs to a discreet, unmarked steel door that slid open silently as she approached. The elevator was lined with dark polished wood and had only one button, a simple glowing P. The ascent was unnervingly fast and completely silent. Her ears popped as the elevator climbed the floors, flashing by on a small digital display. 40, 50, 60. It finally stopped at 75. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into a room that took her breath away. It was an office, but it was larger than her entire apartment. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows offering a staggering panoramic view of the entire city laid out below like a map. The gray clouds that had seemed so oppressive from the street were now a dramatic backdrop. A massive mahogany desk, clear of all clutter, except for a single sleek laptop, sat facing the windows. The carpets were so thick they muffled her footsteps completely. James Harrison, the lawyer from the diner, stood waiting for her. He was dressed in the same impeccable gray suit. "Miss Miller, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured towards 2 plush leather chairs positioned in front of the desk. As Chloe sat down, her eyes were drawn to a series of framed photographs on a credenza behind the desk. Most were of buildings and oil rigs, corporate triumphs, but one was different. It was a black and white photo of a smiling, handsome young man with his arm around a beautiful woman with kind, laughing eyes. The young man was a stranger, but there was something vaguely familiar about his features. "Can I offer you something?" Harrison asked. "Coffee, water?" "Water would be fine, thank you." Chloe managed to squeak. Harrison poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe and handed it to her. Her hand was shaking so badly she had to use both to hold the glass steady. "I know you must have many questions." Harrison began taking the seat opposite her, "and I assure you they will all be answered. Mr. Sterling will be with you shortly." He wanted me to begin by extending his apologies. "Apologies?" Chloe asked, confused. For what? For the deception? Harrison said, his face unreadable. It was, however, a necessary component of his endeavor. Before Chloe could ask what he meant, a side door she hadn't noticed opened, and a man walked in. He was tall and wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. His silver-gray hair was neatly combed, and his face, though lined with age, held an undeniable aura of power and intelligence. He moved with a quiet confidence that filled the room, but it was his eyes that made Chloe's breath catch in her throat. They were a pale, piercing blue. They were no longer cloudy or weary. They were sharp, clear, and focused, and they were looking directly at her. It was him. It was the old man from the diner, transformed, remade. The threadbare coat was gone, replaced by fine wool. The shuffling, hesitant gait was gone, replaced by an authoritative stride. But the face, the eyes, the essence of the man, it was unmistakably the same. He walked around the massive desk and sat in the large leather chair, the entire city skyline, his backdrop. He folded his hands on the polished wood and looked at Chloe. The look was no longer pitiful or desperate. It was the same intense, analytical gaze she had felt on her when she was cleaning up the sugar, but 100 times more potent. Chloe stared speechless. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the frail, penniless old man with the formidable titan of industry sitting before her. The shabby coat, the lost wallet, the spilled sugar, the sob story about a granddaughter. It all flashed through her mind. A deception, Harrison had called it. It had all been an act, a calculated, elaborate lie. A hot wave of humiliation and anger washed over her. She had been played, her sympathy, her kindness, her sacrifice. It had all been for the amusement of a bored billionaire. She had given him her last $40, money she desperately needed for her sister for rent, and it had all been a game. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. The glass of water trembled in her hand. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of awe and fury. "It was you." The man did not flinch. He simply held her gaze, his expression calm, almost sad. "Yes, Miss Miller," said Arthur Sterling, his voice no longer raspy and weak, but the rich, commanding baritone of a CEO. "It was me. Please sit down. We have a great deal to talk about." Chloe remained standing, her body rigid with a fury born of humiliation. "Talk about what?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "How you enjoyed your game, pretending to be homeless to watch the struggling waitress give you her last dime. Was my pity a fun little diversion for you?" Arthur Sterling did not react to her anger. He simply gestured to the chair. "Please, Chloe, sit. You have every right to be angry, but you have also earned an explanation." The quiet sincerity in his voice cut through her rage. Hesitantly, she sank back into the plush leather chair. James Harrison stood by a silent, discreet observer. For the past year, Arthur began his voice, calm and measured. "I have been conducting an experiment. I became Art the old man with a shabby coat to find an answer to a question that was destroying me." His gaze drifted to a black and white photograph on the credenza. It showed a vibrant, smiling woman with kind eyes. "That was my wife, Isabel," he said, a profound grief softening his features. "She was the heart of my life. She came from nothing and believed in one simple truth, that the measure of a person is how they treat someone who can do nothing for them in return. She lived that truth every single day. When she died 2 years ago," Arthur continued, "I was left surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Their kindness was always a transaction. I grew cynical. I started to believe that the world Isabel saw, a world of quiet decency, had died with her." He looked back at Chloe, his eyes locking with hers. "So I set out to find it. I became invisible, a burden, a nobody. I wanted to find one person who would show kindness without expectation. For months I was ignored, dismissed, and treated with contempt. The little charity I received was offered with annoyance, not dignity. Then I walked into your diner." He said, "The first time you paid for my coffee, I was intrigued. It was a simple act, but you offered it with grace. The second time, I deliberately made things more difficult. I spilled the sugar, expecting a flash of irritation. Instead, you knelt on that dirty floor to clean it, refused my pocket change, and shared a piece of your mother's wisdom. I started to hope. He leaned forward, his expression serious. But I had to be certain. My faith was too fragile. Forgive me for this, but I had my team look into your circumstances. I learned about your sister, Lily. I learned about the crushing medical bills, the eviction notice. I knew you were standing on the edge of a cliff. A wave of shame crossed his face. Telling you that story about my granddaughter was the cruelest part of my test. I was asking a drowning woman to give away her life vest. I knew you needed that $40 more than you needed your next breath. A part of me expected you to say no to finally prove my cynical theory right. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the silent room. But you didn't, Chloe. You looked at my fabricated pain, and you responded with genuine compassion. At your absolute lowest point, you chose to give. You didn't just give me money. You gave me back the world my wife had believed in. You proved that her light hadn't gone out after all. Chloe listened speechless, the anger inside her dissolving into a stunned, heart-wrenching understanding. This wasn't a billionaire's cruel game. It was a grieving husband's desperate search for hope. Arthur composed himself and slid a thick leather-bound document across the desk. This search wasn't just for my own peace of mind, Chloe. It was to find a new purpose for my fortune, a legacy Isabel would have been proud of. For the past year, my lawyers have been structuring a new charitable organization, the Isabel Sterling Foundation for Compassionate Care. He tapped the document. The foundation's mission is to provide aid with dignity to find the people who fall through the cracks, the ones who are invisible. It will be endowed with an initial fund of $500 million. Chloe stared at the document, the number incomprehensible. A foundation like this doesn't need another suit from Wall Street, Arthur said, his voice now filled with conviction. It needs a leader who understands the true meaning of charity. It needs someone whose compassion is unshakable, even in the face of their own ruin. It needs a heart, Chloe, not just a brain. He looked at her directly, his gaze piercing. I am not offering you a reward. I am offering you a job. I want you to be the executive director of the Isabel Sterling Foundation. You will have immense resources and a team to support you, but the vision will be yours. Your starting salary will be $300,000 a year. He held up a hand as she began to protest. And the foundation's first official act, effective immediately, is to assume the full lifetime cost of Lily's medical care at any facility in the world you choose. The room was silent. He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her a calling. He was giving her the power to fight the very despair that had nearly consumed her and to help countless others do the same. It was terrifying. It was impossible. She was a waitress. But she thought of Lily, of the eviction notice, and of the look in the old man's eyes in the diner. She took a deep breath, letting the fear wash away, replaced by a surge of purpose. Looking at the man who had turned her world upside down, Chloe Miller gave him a real tear-stained smile. Yes, she whispered, I accept. Life changed with breathtaking speed. The moment Chloe accepted the vast, efficient machinery of Sterling Industries, word into action. Within 24 hours, a team of world-class specialists was reviewing Lily's case. The next day, Chloe was by her sister's side on a private medical jet, flying towards a renowned clinic in Switzerland. The constant gnawing fear for Lily's health was replaced by the quiet hum of the jet engines, a sound of profound and overwhelming relief. While she was away, James Harrison's team quietly erased the shadows of her old life. Her overdue rent was paid, and her cramped apartment was settled. When she returned, it was to a beautiful, secure apartment downtown, a peaceful haven that felt like it belonged to another person. Before starting her new life, however, she had one last stop to make. She walked into the Morning Dove diner, the air thick with the familiar smell of grease and stale coffee. Brenda was at the counter polishing forks with a customary scowl. Well, look who it is, Brenda said, not looking up. Finally decided to show up for your shift. I came to say goodbye, Brenda, Chloe said calmly. I've taken another job. Brenda finally looked up, her eyes scanning Chloe's simple but elegant new dress. Oh, really? Let me guess. Mr. Big Shot in the suit hired you. I give it a month before you're back here begging for your apron. Chloe didn't argue. She simply placed a white envelope on the counter. This is for you. Suspicious Brenda tore it open. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000. Her jaw dropped, the cynical mask she wore every day shattering completely. "What? What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "My mother used to say that sometimes people are sharp because the world has been unkind to them," Chloe said softly. "I thought it was time the world was a little kind to you. Take a vacation, fix your car. Just know that things can get better." Chloe turned and walked toward the door. "But that old man," Brenda called out, her voice trembling. "Who was he?" Chloe paused and looked back at her former colleague, who was staring at the check as if it were an alien artifact. "He was just a man who needed a cup of coffee," she said, and walked out for the last time. Her new office was on the 74th floor of Sterling Tower, with the same breathtaking view as Arthur's. She quickly filled the walls not with expensive art, but with photographs that mattered. Lily smiling in a sunlit garden in Switzerland. The faces of the first families helped by the foundation's initiatives. She was not a waitress anymore, but she was still serving people now on a scale she could never have imagined. Arthur was a true mentor, guiding her through the complexities of finance and management, but always trusting the compassionate instinct he had hired her for. She learned that she had a natural gift for cutting through red tape and seeing the human being at the heart of every problem. Months later, Arthur walked into her office carrying two simple, thick ceramic mugs, the kind from the diner. He handed one to her. It was black coffee. "I thought you might need a break," he said, standing beside her as they looked out over the city. "Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of your old life?" Chloe thought for a moment. The familiar, bitter taste of the coffee, a ghost on her tongue. She remembered the bone-deep exhaustion, the constant fear. "I miss some of the people," she admitted, "but I don't miss the desperation. For so long I believed that my kindness was a weakness, an expense I couldn't afford. That $40 I gave you, it felt like the end of the world." She turned from the window to face him, her eyes clear and full of a quiet strength. "I was wrong," she said. "It wasn't an expense. It was the single greatest investment I ever made." Arthur Sterling smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his pale blue eyes. In that shared moment, they weren't a billionaire and his employee, but two people whose lives had been forever changed by a simple, profound belief that the true wealth of a person is measured only by what they are willing to give away. Chloe Miller's story teaches us a powerful lesson that we often forget in our busy, cynical world. You never know the true impact of a single act of kindness. Her compassion wasn't a transaction. It was a reflection of her character. She didn't give because she thought she would get something in return. She gave because it was who she was, even when she had nothing left. Arthur Sterling wasn't just looking for a kind person. He was looking for a leader whose wealth was measured in empathy, not dollars. This story is a reminder that the best parts of humanity often shine brightest in the darkest moments. The smallest gesture can be the key that unlocks a destiny you never knew was waiting for you. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion, please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear an inspiring message today. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that uncover the extraordinary and the ordinary. What's the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your